Okay, thanks. Okay, so let's start. The goal of this live coding session is to build an open source event registration system we need for a conference we will be organizing next year. And I was inspired by Jeff Fritz because he started live coding a few weeks ago, and I looked at his streams, and it looks like a really good idea, so I'd like to try the same thing. So let me know if you have any issues with the live stream in the chat, and let's begin. So who I am. Maybe not everybody know me. So my name is Thomas Hersek. I'm Microsoft MVP and Microsoft Regional Director, and also one of the authors of the open source framework called .vvm. I love writing code, even if I don't have so much time for doing it last month. I also speak at conferences and local events. I also organize some conferences, and if I have some free time, I'm running a dev company called Riganti. So if you want to ask anything, just use the chat, and I will try to answer. So what's the goal? The goal is to, as I have already said, to write a registration system for one of our events, or for multiple events to be precise. So the biggest event we are planning to organize next year in November is a conference called Update. It will happen in Prague, and we are planning for about 800 attendees. And in addition to this conference, we are also doing smaller events for 150 people several times per year. So we have decided to build a registration system, and because I love doing open source, I will publish the core of this system as an open source project on GitHub. I have the GitHub page open somewhere here. I will post the link in the presentation and in the chat. So the repo is located on this URL, github.com/riganti/open-events. And I will use .NET Core. For the data storage, I will use MongoDB because it's a little bit unusual to do this, and everybody's tired of using SQL Server and Entity Framework, so let's try MongoDB. And for the front-end parts, we will use .vvm, because this open source project can also work as a sample for .vvm and how to write apps in .vvm. So I was thinking about the architecture of this application, and besides the classic approach, I wanted to try something different. So instead of building some data access layer, business layers, and things like that, I have decided to use something like decoupled architecture. Maybe it's not microservices, but it's a little bit inspired by this. The data storage will be the MongoDB. It will be a separate instance, possibly running in a container or just installed on some server. It doesn't matter. It's possible to use also Azure Cosmos DB, but I think this technology needs a few months until they decide how to make this more accessible to smaller projects, because if you look at the pricing of Azure Cosmos DB, it's quite expensive. For small projects, of course, large global scale projects, they don't have such problems, but it's very difficult to access from a very small project like this. So on top of this database, there will be a backend service which will publish REST API. Actually, there will be two kinds of API. One API for public use, so anyone can write a microsite for his conference with a registration form, and connect this microsite with the backend service with the REST API. And also I will write a simple admin portal for this solution, and it will also use a REST API. So there will be, if I run this in containers, there will be 4 containers in total, maybe more because we plan to have a separate registration microsite for every event we are going to do, and it will have to be branded somehow. So that's the plan. What are the requirements for this application? So it should support free events where you just register and go, and also paid events. So you will be able to choose from several price levels of the tickets. Typically, there is the entrance fee for the conference and some workshops and things like that. So there can be multiple price levels. And also there will be some discounts if somebody uses coupon, or some cancellation policies. For example, if you cancel more than 1 month before the event, you will get all the money back, or things like that. Of course, there is the ticket reservation, and because for the paid events, the reservations will be held for quite a long time, because we will open the reservations half of a year before the conference actually happens. So there will for sure be some changes in the reservations, maybe switching between attendee names. If you just cannot attend the conference, you can ask a colleague to attend instead of you, so you will have to change the name on the reservation, or maybe change the billing address, because if your company pays for the conference, they will need invoice to a correct address, and also the cancellation. And of course, for us, we will need some admin portal, and of course there will be many other things which are related to Czech legislation, like generating the correct invoices based on the Czech law, and also we have some electronic registry of revenues. So integration with these government systems will be also part of this solution, but we will not give this into the open source framework, and we will code this separately. So today I would like to build the basics of the system, some basic event management API, and maybe the user interface. So that's the plan, and let's just switch to the coding. So the first thing I have done is the installation of MongoDB. So if you haven't used MongoDB, you can do it quite easily. It's very easy to use. For installing software, I love this utility called Chocolate. So if you install it from the website, you can then just say choco install MongoDB, and dash epsilon means that you agree with all the requirements and license agreements and things like that. So if you run this command, as I have previously done, it will install MongoDB for you. I think it's the easiest way how to get MongoDB, especially if you are already using Chocolate. So that's the first thing. And also, if you look in the program files, MongoDB, it will everything is installed here in program files MongoDB. So if you look in the bin directory, there is a lot of files. These two are the most important. The first one, the Mongo exe, it's a client application where you can query the database and work with the local data. And MongoD is the daemon, which is the server itself. So if you run MongoD, it will start working. By default, the databases are stored here on the C, data, and DB. If you don't create these directories, you have to create a data/db directory. If you don't create them, the server will not start. There will be some error message, so you will know what's wrong quite easily. But if you don't create these directories, MongoDB will not start. So let's run command line in this folder, and I will run MongoD, and it should start the MongoDB server with on my local machine. and it listens on port 27017, which is the default port for MongoDB. By default, there is no authentication, so do not open this port to the internet, because everybody would be able to read everything you have stored in the database. If we run this in containers, that it is quite easy to set up that this port is available only to the container cluster and it's not exposed to public. So I think this is not a problem for us. Or of course we can turn the authentication on and update the connection string in our database in our application. And if I run another command line window, and when I run Mongo, it's a client application which by default it connects to a local server. This is the connection string, this MongoDB 1.7.0.0.1.27017. This is the connection string we can use later in the application, and we will see what happens. And in this console you can use JavaScript to query the database. So I can clear the console so there's no mess around, and you can open some database. So I can say use open events, and it will switch to the open events database, and then I can use the DB variable to access everything which is in the database. For example, I can create in SQL we have tables. In document databases typically we call this collections. So I can say db dot and name of a collection, for example events, and I think it will be created automatically. And if I say find, it will return nothing because this collection is empty. But if you don't know what to write, you can always say db events help, and it will give you a list of methods with documentation what you can do. So it's quite easy to work with this API. It's JavaScript, but still it's quite easy to use. So I will be using this tool to work with my database. So that's it. That's the basics about the database. Now let's create the project. I haven't even created the solution, so I will start from scratch. On the GitHub there is only the default repo with readme license and gitignore. I have already added gitignore for Visual Studio, so it's the easiest way when you are creating a repo to specify you want gitignore from Visual Studio, because everything is already there. So I can start a new project. So my backend application will be just ASP.NET Core web app. So I will start a new ASP.NET Core web application. Oh, sorry, I have to pick this template from here. So .NET Core, ASP.NET Core web application, and I have to choose the correct path. cdef open events. Let's create, for example, src folder here, and we can create open events, and the name of the project can be open events backend, and solution name will be just open events, because I will have other projects in the solution, and I will have open events registration portal, open events.admin, and things like that. So backend will be API, REST API for the other front-end parts of the system. And of course, everybody will be able to consume the API. So if they have appropriate permissions, they will be able to use any methods defined in the API. So open events.backend. I will start with empty application because I don't like the default templates. I always like to know exactly what's included and what's installed in the project. So let's create an empty app. And in ASP.NET Core, the MVC and Web API are just one technology. It's called MVC. So if you haven't been using .NET Core, so there is no Web API. It's already included in ASP.NET MVC. So the first thing I will do is to install the appropriate NuGet package. I can use the console because it will be, I think it will be a little bit quicker. So, oh, maybe not. Okay. Install package Microsoft ASP.NET Core.mvc, and it should install the latest stable version in looks like package source should be NuGet. Let's try it again. Okay, so now it works. I don't have what happened to my NuGet configuration. Okay, so there's MVC. I need to configure it in Startup CS. So first I will register all the services in the service collection. So services dot at MVC, and here instead of this sample middleware, I will register MVC. So I will say use MVC. This configure method builds the HTTP request pipeline. So first I had to install all the services in the dependency injection container, and in this method I'm just adding MVC middleware to handle HTTP requests. So that's the first thing to do. Also, I will need the MongoDB package, and to be honest, I don't remember the exact name of the package, so I'll have to search for it. So Mongo, and this is the official .NET driver for MongoDB, so mongodb.driver, and let's install it. Okay, so let's confirm everything. Okay, so now Mongo is installed. So now I have MVC app with MongoDB package installed. So let's create a controller. I will create a directory called controllers. Maybe the structure will change in the future because I will want to split the controller, but not now. So I will call it event controller because the first API I want to build is the event management API. I have to create some events, set the price levels, the cancellation policies, and things like that. And I have to update it sometimes because of various reasons, maybe deleting the event and listing all the events. This will be available in the admin portal, these APIs. So this is the API for admin portal. I will not use setup authentication now. We will do it later because it will be more difficult to do the testing. So when I'm building some prototypes or some first versions, I typically don't hassle with the authentication because it can be configured quite easily later. And here in this system, there will be only two roles. One is admin, which can do everything, and there is the attendee, which can only reserve their event, make their reservations, and modify their own reservations. So the permission model here is not very difficult. So all controllers should derive from the Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC controller. And let's add a first event, method. And it will return a list of events. And for now, I will create an object called event DTO. And DTO is an abbreviation for data transfer object. And I will use this to be returned from the API, because in the database I will at the beginning, I can use the same object to store it in the database, because this API is only for admin purposes, so I don't need to worry about giving the users the entire object. But in the future, typically the properties and data which you want to publish or expose to the public via the REST API is typically different than the things you have stored in the database. So typically this is different than the class that is actually stored, even if you are using a document database. But let's not dig into such details now. So I will create a method called get list, for example, and let's create an event DTO class, and let's move it to a new folder. So I'm using ReSharper. I am used to the shortcut. This is a fresh install of computer, so the ReSharper is not configured yet. But I'm using Ctrl+RO to move new created classes to a folder. So I can say not controllers. I can say, for example, model, and create this folder and just confirm. So this class will be moved in the model folder, and that's it. And also the namespace is changed and also automatically imported here. So it's quite easy to use. Okay, so what do we need to connect to the MongoDB? First, you need to create a Mongo client. This code I'm going to write is just a demo of how we approach MongoDB. Of course, I will refactor it immediately to use dependency injection. So now I say Mongo client. So I'm creating a new Mongo client, and the connection string is the one I have seen here, but I have cleared the screen, so let's write it from memory. I hope it will be correct. MongoDB, localhost, and the port is 271017. I hope that's correct. So this is the client. It can be a singleton because it doesn't have its own state. It's just an API which we can use to talk with the database. So we can have one instance of Mongo client per application. And then we need to open some database, because of course on the server you can have several databases. So database equals client get database, and the database name is open events. Open events. So basically we need this object because every database can have multiple collections. So I can say get collection. If the collection doesn't exist, it will be created automatically. So any collection you start using, it will be created. You don't have to use anything like create table as you are used from SQL Server. So at the beginning, we can just register the database into our dependency injection container. But here, when I need a specific collection, I will have to say which type, which class is stored in the collection. So that will be, for example, event, and also the name of the collection. So to make my life easier and to prevent some silly mistakes, because basically I will need this collection in every method in this controller, I can create an interface of, for example, something like iEvents collection, and tell the container how to register it. So I will create also the event class, and I will put it in the data directory. So I will create a new directory called data, sorry, not date, data. So this one, and move this class into this folder. I will remove this guy, and that's my collection. So that's not how I will work with the database. I will now create an interface which will implement, it will derive from iMongo collection event, and this will be interface for my collection. Theoretically, I could use iMongo collection of event, but the problem is that I can have multiple collections which would use the same class and have different names. So maybe it's a little bit clear, it's a little bit better to have a specific interface for this collection. So I can also create a folder collections, and I will create a new interface which would represent my collection. So I events collection, and it will derive, it will be interface, not class, and it will derive from iMongo collection of event. This is my class which I will use to store events, and now I need to register this in the container. So let's borrow these guys and go to the startup. Oh, what happened to my Visual Studio? Okay, it's great now. Okay, so I should register everything in the services in this method. I will create some extension methods because I don't want to have all the registrations right here in the startup. So I can say something like database service extensions, and it will be a static class because it will contain a static method. Every extension method has to be static method. Public static void add MongoDB, for example, at MongoDB collections, for example, and we are extending the iService collection services. So that's it. And now I have used this code. So let's register the Mongo client. As I have already said, it can be singleton. So we can say services at singleton Mongo client, and we will use this factory method. Currently I have the connection string hard-coded. I will not mess with the configuration yet, but we are prepared to replace the connection string later. So this argument here, it's a service provider, because you may need to resolve some other services before you get this one. So this is the service provider. I can name it provider, so it's more clear. So we have registered a Mongo client, and it's singleton, so there will be only one instance per application. Then I can register my database, and because I will only use one database, I can services at singleton. I can also use a singleton and Mongo database. iMongo database, and we will use provider equals, and I can resolve get service Mongo client and get database open events. I could create a class for this, so I could have something like open events Mongo database, which would do this in the constructor, or maybe I could request this guy in the constructor. But since we are using only one database, let's not dig into such details. And now I need to register the collections, and these guys can be singleton. But when I start working with a collection, I think everyone should have its own instance. So let's register it as transient. At transient, iEvents collection, and also a provider, and we can resolve this one. So we will resolve the iMongo database, and we will ask for this collection. Of course, I can have this collection also backed up by my class, but I don't think it's so. And also this returns only iMongo collection, so we should do a cast on this. Oh, sorry, it won't work because it's the other way of inheritance. So let's create the class. It will be better. So events collection, and it will be a class. Oh, sorry, it's not a good idea. Okay, so let's start with Mongo collection of event because it's easier to use at the beginning. Let's do the abstraction later. So I can just ask for iMongo collection of event, and I will get the correct collection retrieved from the Mongo database using this call. So that's it, and let's use it in the controller. So I can start with constructor and request this events collection, and that's it. So now I can use this collection anywhere I like. So if we should retrieve a list of events, we can use something like events collection, find, possibly find async. We can specify some filters, and this will get a list of all events. Of course, I can use also the paging and sorting and things like that. This Mongo client supports LINQ expressions, so it's quite easy to use, and there's also an API to build the filters the other way. So if anything is not supported in LINQ, you can use MongoDB API to build your own filters. If there is a lot of events in the database, for example, millions, or maybe smaller number, thousands, it would be a good idea to create indexes. So by default they are created automatically, but you can define your own indexes. So later we will create indexes on this table if we need them for some reason. Basically in our deployment there will be tens of events, so it's not such a big number. We can safely browse the entire collection of documents because it will be, for example, 30 JSON documents, so it's not such a big deal. But if there is thousands of events, we will need to use the indexes for listing all the records. Okay, so now we can work with the event and define what information we need to store about a particular event in our system. So in document databases, every document should have its ID. Mongo supports any string ID. There is a special type called object ID, which we can use, but we can also create a string ID. So I think the strings are better. So I will create a string ID, and it can be just any string. I can use GUID or anything I want. I think that using GUID it's the easiest way. So I will use string and put there some GUID values. So every event needs to have its name, and the websites of the events can be localized. So it might be a good idea to provide also the options for localization of the names and details of the events. So I could use something like dictionary string of string. The key will be something like language code. We can create some language code, CS, EN, or DE, anything, any kind of language code. But maybe at the beginning, so we won't complicate things too much, let's just use string. But because we are working in document databases, we can safely create properties of complex types, because every document will get serialized into JSON, or to be accurate, to BSON, which is a binary form of JSON, and stored in the document databases as one object. Document databases are great when you need to pick an object by its ID. So if you know the ID, it's super fast to get the entire object. And the object can be can be complicated, very complex structures, tree structures, arrays, dictionaries. Practically anything you can serialize in JSON can appear in this object. So if I use dictionary string, the document could look like this. For example, there will be some ID, which will be some good, and there will be title. And because it's dictionary, it's an object, and it's a map of key to value. So in Czech, it will be, for example, moje konference. It's in Czech. In English, it means my conference. Yeah, so that's how the dictionary would be serialized in this method. And of course, you can use any number of languages. There should probably be some default one which could be used if the localization for the particular language is not there. At the beginning, let's just use one language. We can upgrade to multiple languages later, so the things are not complicated. So the event will have title, some description. Some events can have multiple dates, so it's not just that I specify begin date and end date. I will have to specify a list of event date. And as you can see, if you are writing with working with SQL, you will have to create a new table for list of dates for the events. But now in DocumentDB, it's part of this object, so you don't need to create any other collections. Everything is still stored in the events collection. So now I can use date time begin date, end date. I don't have the using up here, so I had ReSharper to add it for me. So there is begin date, end date. Now there is a question about UTC versus non-UTC events. It's always a problem because we should store the time zone for the event, and because if you want to work with some events where people actually gather on one place, the dates are basically every time they're in the local time zone, so we don't need to work with UTC. However, if the event is live streamed to the whole world, it's of course much more important to have the time zone information included. So I really don't know, but let's not complicate things up. Let's just use date time, and it should be a local time for the event. And of course, bigger events which will cover the entire world will have their microsites, so they can deal with some time zone conversions. Let's use local dates for the beginning and ending of events, because here it's not so important like in other systems to keep track of time zones. So that's event dates. There is also, we need to remember the price levels for the event. So we can use event, for example, event price, and there will be several options, and also they can be time restricted. For example, if you register in the first month, since the registration was open, you can get some special discount So there can be something like begin date, end date, and so there is also a time restriction for the price. For prices, I will use decimal, so that's the price, and we don't know which currency are we using, so I will put there also currency code. I don't, because I don't want to complicate things up, so I will not create a collection of all currencies. This is just the convention, so somebody will manually enter the currency code, and we will, or there can be the restriction on the UI level. I don't want a table of all currencies in the world. It's too much complicated. And also there should be some title like basic attendance fee, or default standard attendance fee, or if there's some early bit price or something like that. So there is title and maybe a description which will describe in detail what's included in this ticket price. So and there can be multiple price levels. If there is not a single price level, it would mean that the event is free. Also, we can restrict the registration. So registration begin date and registration end date. And also I will not worry about time zones. Everything will be stored in a local time zone of the particular event. We are not building a global solution for all events. We are building a solution for smaller communities which do several conferences per year. So we don't need to dig into this too much. And also there can be some cancellation policies, because if you decide to cancel the ticket, there can be some penalty. For example, we will refund only 50% of the price. So I will also add event cancellation policy, event cancellation policies. I will name it just cancellation policies. It should, just cancellation policies, and initialize it right away. And event cancellation policy, and we can also say from which date until which date there is an option to cancel. And because it should not depend on the price, I think that the most common case is that the cancellation fee is in percents. So I can say cancellation fee percent. So it can be, for example, 50, and it means 50% of the price you have paid will remain on our bank account for messing the things up and adding additional work to us. Okay, so let's move these classes to individual files. So let's do this for all for all types in this file. So every class will get its own file, but still, in comparison to relational database, we still have one collection of documents, nothing else. And also there can be a registration cap, maximum number of people that can be registered on the event. So let's add, for example, max number of attendees, or maybe max attendee count. So maximum number of attendees. If there is more, the system should not allow you to register. So basically this is the definition of my event. And because right now I can give everything to my admin portal. So currently there are no secret data here, or there is not any single field I wouldn't need in the admin portal. So I can convert this event to DTOs using Automapper, for example. So I will be prepared to later times where I would need to have some changes in my database schema, so I won't have to change the API yet. So let's just copy this into the event DTO, because currently the objects that will be spit out from the API are the same, but it can change in the future. So now I have copied this, and also we need to create DTOs for these guys. So I will create event date DTO. I will create event price DTO and event cancellation policy DTO, and also copy the contents, because currently everything is the same. So event cancellation policy will get these fields, event price will get these fields, and event date will get these fields. And also I can create all standalone files for every type in my file. So I have the same structure of objects in my model folder. Model are the objects which I'm giving out of the API. The data is a definition of my database. Maybe later I can split this in separate projects to have some data access layer in a standalone project, but currently it's not necessary. Okay, so my Visual Studio with ReSharper just freezed, so let's give it a few seconds until it does this job, hopefully. Okay, so let's restart Visual Studio. Thank you very much, Visual Studio. I really like you. Okay, so let's hope that I haven't lose all my changes and files. Okay, so let's try it again. Okay, so there's 2 files, 3 files. So what happened to the 4th file? Nobody knows. So let's check it out. So event price looks okay. Event DTO. There is cancellation policy, and there is also a file for cancellation policy. So this is duplicated. So let's. Oh, another freeze. Let's hope no. Okay, so let's remove this one, because we already have this class. Oh, processing assemblies, oh my god. Okay, so this is a very complicated project, so ReSharper needs its time to actually create its caches, and this one doesn't have its own file, so let's try to move it to a separate file. Let's hope it will work now. Okay. Okay. So it looks like we are done, finished. Okay, so what about transformation of these data objects to our DTOs? So I'm used to use a library called Automapper. So I can install a package. Okay, so install package Automapper. Okay, so again, a problem with NuGet sources. I don't know why it happens. So let's use NuGet.org. Okay, so now I have the latest version of Automapper installed in my project. So there are several ways how to work with Automapper. At the beginning, we need to create some mappings. So I will create a folder called mappings, and let's create a mapping for our events. So event mapping, and let's tell Automapper what it should do with the objects. So we will need a function configure, for example, and Automapper is used like this: mapper. There's a static class mapper, which you can use, and you can say initialize, and here you will get IMapper configuration expression, and you need to configure it. So maybe let's do this: IMapper configuration expression. So we will get this as a parameter and do our configuration, because in the future there will be more mappings for other collections. So I will call them at the startup one by one, and inside of mapper.initialize, and it will give me the mapping. So let's tell Automapper create map, and if you have event, you can use it as event DTO. And Automapper is great because it can, if the property names and types are same, it will create the mapping automatically. So that's everything I need to do almost. Also, we have event cancellation policy, and we are mapping it into event cancellation policy DTO. I like this camel case matching. I'm just writing the capital letters, and it will match anything which I'm using. So it's great. Event date and event date DTO, so EDD, and also event price EPD, event price DTO. It's quite quick. So this is one way. And also we will need to map the DTOs back to our entities, let's say entities, which are stored in the MongoDB. So I will need to create the mapping in the opposite way. So I can just say mapper create map event DTO to event. And from event cancellation policy DTO to event cancellation policy, and from event date DTO to event date, and from event price DTO to event price. So that's the mapping in the opposite way. In the future, if the API of event changes, or for example, if I add some properties or add a localization, I will be able to use the for member and say, for example, if I have some property in the event, I want to set it to something like map from, and tell Automapper the expression it should use to map this property. So if I add some extra property in my storage, it doesn't matter. I won't have to change the API because I can resolve all the conflicts, all the changes here, so the DTOs can remain the same. Of course, the API should be versioned in the future, but when the system is in the development, the schema of data changes quite frequently. So maybe these internal changes in the system will be much frequent than changes in the API. So that's the reason I'm using different objects for my storage and different objects for my API, because I need to version these objects separately from versioning these objects. Or maybe I won't in the future, but let's be prepared for this situation. And because of Automapper, it's very easy to do. So that's basically that's it. And there's also one thing we can do, but we can do it later. It's called optimistic concurrency, because when I'm editing my event, anyone else can go and edit the event, and we would overwrite our own changes. So that's why it's a good idea to create an optimistic concurrency. In MongoDB, there is no built-in approach. As far as I'm aware, there is no built-in approach for optimistic concurrency, but you can do it quite easily. You can add a property called Etag. And for example, set some new GUID or something like that inside this property. And anytime you change this event, just change the Etag. And if you want to store the event, you should check that the Etag hasn't changed since the time you have retrieved your event. So that can be used. Yeah, you can when you are saving the object, you can check that the Etag hasn't changed, that in the database there's still the record with the old Etag, and simultaneously to update the Etag, so anyone else who got this version of the object, he will notice that the object has changed in the meantime. So we could do this, and we will do this in when we will handle the event registrations. So, but no, let's remove it for now, and let's build the API. So we have events controller, and we have events collection. I can use async API. So let's use this as an async. So inside we can say events collection find async, and this allows me to list all the events. This API will be very easy at the beginning because I won't have any filters. So let's just return all the events. In the future we will add some paging or sorting, maybe full text search functionality. So that's it. So we can say var events equals event collection find async, and oh, it needs some filter. So let's use, maybe we will have to add some paging at least, because it doesn't want me to return all the objects. Or maybe there is or let's say true, so it would get all the events. Let's see if this actually works. I think that it should work, or maybe we can. No, there's no command. Filter definition empty. We can say filter definition empty, and it means empty filter. Okay, so that's maybe better than the link expression. So this should give us a list of events, and the only thing we need to do is to get the events, which is a collection basically, to list, and after we have the list, we can map it to our DTOs. So let's use mapper AutoMapper we can use the static method, but maybe in the future it would be better to give their IMapper object, or to create a mapper for every kind of object. But now we can just say mapper map, and we can say map to event DTO, and we will give it an event. And because this is a static method, I can simplify this lambda expression to just this, because it's a function which takes the event, and this is also a function which takes the event, so we don't need to write the arrow. And we can do toList again, and this should be our result. So let's hope that this will work. So we will query the MongoDB for all records in the database, and when we say toList, we should get all of them. This is just a temporary implementation. In the future, we should put here paging, and we should make it, and we can make it required, because if you want to get a million records from the database, it's really not a good idea. But let's just use this at the beginning, because we won't have so many events. So I will just drop a note here to do paging and filtering. So that's it. And let's specify also the route for our API. So we can say route, for example, API events, and this is get. The method name starts with get, so it should be HTTP get automatically. But if somebody gets a nice idea to rename this, let's add HTTP get here also, so he won't forget to add it later. And basically that's it. So we can test. We cannot test because we don't have any data in the database, so we would only see an empty array. So let's add also an option to specify to create a new event. So we can say async void create, and creating typically works by HTTP post. So we will use HTTP post, and I can say await events collection insert 1 async, and this accepts a document called event. So let's use a variable name e. Unfortunately, I cannot use event because in C# it's a keyword, so event is not a good name. And as a parameter, I can use event DTO. So let's use, for example, event data. And because I will use an HTTP post, I have to specify from body. In ASP.NET Web API on the old .NET framework, this wasn't really necessary. But in ASP.NET Core, they made a change, and this should be necessary and should be always present here, so the code can work. So that's it. And the only I should do some validations here. For example, my cancellation policies shouldn't have any intersection. And also, yeah, in the chat they say that I can use @event. Yes, I know about this, but I don't like the @sign neither. So let's say just e, but I don't think it's necessary. It's only a local variable. And I can also say mapper map, and map to event from event data. The very important thing when I'm inserting new record is to specify ID. So if the ID wasn't provided, and if ID string is null or empty EID, then I can assign it. If the user chooses to assign the ID by himself, it's okay. If there is a collision, if we already have an event with this ID, this method would throw an exception. So that's what we can catch and react to this. And also we should return a proper HTTP code. So of course I should use try catch. And if the document is already present there, I can, for example, return HTTP 409 conflict or things like that. Yeah. Otherwise, I would say no content 204. So that's let's do it later. Right now we have two methods. I can also create a put method, which could do the updates, and in that case we should place the ID in the URL. We have the ID also here in the object, so we should make sure that the ID in the object is same in the URL, but the ID in the URL is the more important one, so we will just replace whatever is here in the ID property. Maybe it will be nothing there, because if it's not necessary, if it's in the URL, maybe the client won't send it at all. So I will add it in the object also. So let's put ID here, and let's also specify the route. I say just this ID in curly braces, which means that we will append the parameter to this URL. Okay, so in the chat, Martin says that you can use reverse map in the automapper. That's true, but if the mapping changes somehow, and I want to, for example, do the map different in these two directions, then I will have to specify the changes, and I think it's not so intuitive to have the reverse map, but also, yeah, it's a nice idea. So thanks. So here in the update, I will also map this event data to event, and I will replace whatever is in the property called ID. I will replace with this in URL, which means that if the user specifies ID in the body, it will just be ignored. Or maybe I could check if it's the same and throw exception. I don't think it's important right now. We can do it later. So we can say update one async, and here we should specify a filter. So we can use either filter definition. There is an API which you can use to build the filters, or you can just use a link expression. So I can say link expression ID equals ID. This will be very quick, because the problem is that now there is the conflict in the names. So let's EV equals ID, and here is what we should replace. And there is update definition, so I could update only some properties, so that's not I want to do. So instead we will use replace one async, because we don't want to merge. We should replace this object, at least for now. Maybe in the future we can change this, so we will get the record from the database, then map into the existing record, and then do the replace or do the update. So here I can specify the new event. It's good enough for now, but if we change the API, we should work this out. So I will also drop a note, populate the idea behind this is that the admin and editing the events won't happen so frequently. I think that when we are doing a conference, we need to update something, and typically it's only a description or things like that, so it's not so important. But of course, later we could extend this functionality, and of course it should be, a lot of validations should be here, so that's also a thing we will add later. Right now I just want to have some prototype which would work at least somehow. So public async void delete string ID. You don't need the object for this purpose, so just the ID. HTTP delete, and we will just we should have async task, not async void. It's a quite common mistake here. So the runtime knows when the action actually finished, and it will wait until it's finished before it returns the HTTP response. And here I can say await events collection, delete one async, and also we will specify a filter, and this delete one, replace one, it will make sure that this is only one document. So this is my filter. I can use it, and that should be it. It will delete the event. Of course, later we may think about soft deletes, because deleting the entire object is not a good idea. In almost never it's a good idea to delete your data. So I will drop a note that we should do soft deletes. Okay, so that's it. And this is my very simple and very temporary API controller. It will require a lot of Luboš says that I'm not using the Etag. I have dropped it out for now because we should edit later. However, I didn't want to spend too much time with this right now. But let's also make a note, use Etag, and do it later. Okay, so this is my API, and let's try it if it works. I believe it won't, because it's a lot of code, and no tests, and I haven't even run and compiled the project. Oh, let's see, the build succeeded, which is great. And for debugging these REST APIs, there is a nice extension called Postman. It's basically, you can install it as a standalone app, or it can be integrated with Chrome. So either we can search for it, or if you run apps there, you can add an app here, and it will you can search for apps and install it here, and it will appear here, so you will be able to run it from this place. But I haven't it installed yet, so Postman, let's install it first. Okay, so this is that's it. So let's download it. And I can try the GET request right now. So the URL is API events, and when I run this event, so there is a problem, unable to resolve service, iMongo collection. There was some, I have created my my extension method, but I think I forgot to use it, to actually call it. So Yeah, that's true. I have created my nice extension method to register everything in the dependency injection container, but I'm not using it actually. So at MongoDB collections, and this contains my registrations. So let's try it again. Okay, so download in progress. Oh, it's finished. So let's say continue download. Okay, let's run it. And in the meantime, oh, okay, so let's try it again in Chrome. Maybe that's the file download which did the problem. Yeah, so Postman is running, which is great. We can use it to test out our API, and operation is not legal in the current state. Oh my god. Okay, so let's restart IIS Express and let's restart Google Chrome, because I guess one of these programs is causing this issue. Okay. Okay. This is strange. So let's try it without debugger. We won't have debugging, but okay. So maybe this crashed even before it started. So maybe there's a problem with some registrations, or maybe there is some .NET exe process running. So let's. Okay, so this is great. I have this and registering provider, registering things, and that's it. I'm not calling automapper, so that's another issue. Let's add breakpoint here. Yeah, so we are here. That's great. Use MVC, and this is also great. So what's the problem actually? Oh, now it works. So I don't know what happened. Maybe some process was stuck. Okay, so API events, but we don't have automapper, so we will get another exception that automapper is not there. Okay, because the collection was empty, so we didn't call automapper, so there's no error here, but if there is at least one record, there will be a problem with automapper. So I should also initialize automapper. So mapper initialize, and here is my function. Yeah, it should get one parameter, mapper, and let's just say new event mapping. We will create an instance and configure mapper. I could make this static, but I think that later when there's more mappings, I will discover them automatically in my assembly, so I won't have to keep the list of all mappers here. So maybe I will do this using in the dependency injection container. I will let him discover all mappings which could be marked with some interface and run configure on all of them. That's how we do it in real projects. Okay, so this ReSharper says there's a compile error, but I don't think there is. So maybe it's just some glitch. So let's run the application again and let's try Postman. So Yeah, Martin says that I can disable JavaScript debugging. That's true, because currently we don't have any JavaScript here. But I will just grab the URL and try to use Postman. So I don't want to do anything like that. I just want to get my results. So API/events. I can zoom it a little bit. So okay, the wheel doesn't work, so I cannot zoom it. So when we send this request, so we can see we got an empty array, which is great. So let's create some event. So I can post an object here, and my request body, I will, for example, as a header, I will say content type will be application JSON. So that's my content type. And here I can say I'll be using JSON, and let's create the object. So right now I don't know if ASP.NET Core by default, if it's making the first letters of all property names lowercase. So let's try it. I will say title with a capital T, but I guess it won't work. So let's create a title, my conference. So that's the minimalistic object I want to insert. I'm not specifying the ID, so it should be assigned automatically. And if I add a breakpoint in the controller, let's try it works. Let's see if there will be something stored in the object. So let's send it. Okay, so I got the object, and we can see the title is here. So yeah, let's use capital letters for the first thing. So let's run this through Automapper. So now we have the event object. We can see that these guys are translated. So Automapper had created the mapping successfully. The collections are empty. No, it's not null because I have initialized them, which is great, because right now this will be initialized. And let's assign some ID. And now when I say events collection insert one async, I hope that this will get through, and yeah, it appears we're done. So I had 200. Okay, so that's great. It took quite long because of the debugging, but now I should have my record in the database. So let's look in the console of Mongo exe. So now I'm working with the database open events. I can say use open events to make sure that I'm still using this database. And now, because the name of the collection I registered was events, so there should be a collection named events. So I say db.events.find, and I don't specify any filter. So this should spit out all the documents in the collection. And as you can see, the ID was renamed to _ID, which is internal name for the ID. In C# you can use also _ID to name your property, but ID works too. So I'm using ID because it's more C#ish way to name IDs. So you can see there's ID, there's title, description is null, dates is an empty collection, prices is empty, cancellation policies is empty, and we have registration begin date, registration end date, and max attendee count. So that works. So let's try, for example, put. So let's specify registration begin date will be, for example, 2018 January, and I'm not doing any time zone things, so I think this is in UTC, but let's not worry about it for now. So I have registration, begin date, registration, end date, not event date, end date, and max attendee count, and max attendee count will be, for example, 100. So let's put this to the database, and I need to specify the ID. So let's borrow the ID from here. So /ID. This is ID of my event. And let's also go through debugger. So we have events controller. So let's do our update and send. So we have this object. As you can see, the dates are deserialized correctly. Max attendee count is here too. So let's go through the automapper. Let's create a new entity. Let's use the ID from the URL in the entity. And now I can replace one and it should work. So we have replaced the object for another one. So also I can check again in the console. So now we can see we have the date here. And now it assumed that the date is local. So we can see it's shifted by 1 hour. Registration and date is here. I wonder if I use this format, if I add Z at the end, maybe it will be treated as UTC. Let's try it. So I get sent again. And we can see the dates are still the same. But if I go here, this kind is not local, it's UTC now. So that's great, because now when I replace the object and look here, now we can see that this stayed in UTC. So you can use Z at the end of the date to specify that you are in UTC. Or you can say +01 colon 00, which would be the offset. So this is supported in JSON, and it's a good idea to decide whether you want to use UTC or not, because it depends on how the actual value will look in the database. So that's put, and let's delete this guy. So I will just say delete. In this case, the body is just ignored because delete requests don't send anybody. So I can leave it here, but it won't be transferred to the server. And let's put a breakpoint in the delete. It should be quite easy. So let's say send, and we got this ID here. So we can delete our record and verify in the console that it's already deleted. So now you can see that events return nothing because I have deleted my own conference. Okay, so that's the basics of working with Mongo, and this is a basic crude usage of my application. So let's fix one thing here, and if we add some extra fields in the event object in the database, which won't be persisted in the event DTO, we would replace this object. So that's not what I want. So we can do this. We can load the event first. Is await events collection, find one async, just find async, sorry. Find async, and we can use EVID equals ID, and we can say first, first or default. So that's it. So we will get, or we can just say first, because if there is no record like this, we should throw an exception. So that's it. So this is our object which is stored in Mongo, and we can say mapper map and use DTO and pass the actual object as a second parameter, which means that we will take this DTO and we will populate the object with our DTO. So if there is some extra properties in this object, they will stay unchanged, so we will not lose any extra properties which we have added in the database. And we should replace the ID here, or we can tell AutoMapper, which is great. We can tell AutoMapper that the IDE should not be mapped back. So if we are mapping the event to event DTO, we should forget about the ID. So we can say ID and mapping action will be ignore, which means that any ID which will be here will be ignored and the ID will be kept from this target object. However, this means that we need to change this one because we are mapping here, so the ID wouldn't be mapped at all. So maybe this check is not necessary, and we should assign the ID always. So in the documentation, we can say that the ID is always ignored. We don't need it. We don't need the user to give it to us. So that's a thing we can do. Also, it's a quite good idea to tell which ID was assigned, and typically it's done by a redirect to another method we don't have here. So I can also add a method called get, for example, get1, or just get. Maybe just get will be great. So I will return a task of event DTO, and here I can change this to work with one object. So basically we can use this one, retrieve the object string ID, retrieve the object by ID, make sure that there's one, and go through the AutoMapper. So mapper map event. Oh no, I have switched my keyboard. Event DTO, and like this. So that's better. And when we create a new entry, we should redirect to it. So we can say here that we redirect to this URL. So when you say send the post request, you will automatically be redirected to a get to this ID. So you can read the ID of the record, and also you know the URL on which you can always find it. So that's also quite a good idea to do. So we can adjust this function to return HTTP request message, and using this we could say something like return, and we can say redirect or create it. It's also one HTTP status 201 created. So we could say that it was created at some route and with some parameters. So that's what I could do, and I should do it. This API is not so much clean, so that would be one of the things I should do. So let's drop a note here. you return correct HTTP codes. Okay, so that's it. There's a lot of nodes, but let's not waste time with this. Let's do something different. Because we will need to consume this API on the other end, we will want to use some technology which could generate proxy clients for us. So let's use one of these technologies you can use is Swagger, and it's also a nice piece of technology. So I can add a NuGet package, and it's called Swashbuckle. Swashbuckle, it's an implementation of Swagger for .NET Core, and also for old .NET ASP.NET Web API. And there is a version swashbuckle.asp.NET Core, and this package will add support for Swagger in our application. So let's add it here. And what actually Swagger does? The first thing the Swagger does is that it can generate a JSON file which describes your API. What URLs is it using, what objects it returns, what objects you can post to it, and things like that. There is also a thing called Swagger UI, which is a simple JavaScript app which you can use to browse the API. Basically, it just downloads this JSON document and generates a list of all operations for you, and you can just test the API in real time. And also, there's a lot of tools which can use the Swagger JSON to generate actual C# or proxy classes in C# or in other languages, for example, TypeScript and things like that. So let's use Swashbuckle. I have just installed it in my project. So let's say services, add Swagger gen, and we can specify some options. And there should be some option like Swagger doc. I think that this is the Swagger doc, and it will generate a Swagger document. So for example, v1 new info, and maybe there is no parameters. So let's for example say title is open event API. So let's use this. I believe that this is correct. So let's use this, and here we can use Swagger, and also there should be some options. There is only route template pre-serialized filters, so that's not interesting for us, so we don't need options. And there is also Swagger UI, and this is important for us, and I think I have to specify some options here. You can use, for example, authentication for your UI and things like that, inject custom style sheets and things like that, specify document title, and I think we have to say Swagger endpoint, and I hope that this will be the correct one. If not, let's look in the documentation what will they say. So let's run it, and at the beginning let's try if the Swagger URL is correct. So I have just now the browser opened. So let's try. Okay, so that's not correct URL, so I have to look. What what's the correct URL for the default Swagger JSON. So that's great. Swagger/v1/Swagger JSON, so not API, sorry. So Swagger, and this JSON, it's I can paste it in Visual Studio and format it so we can see how it looks. So this is JSON file. What I have pressed, I don't know. Okay, I have used JavaScript, so that's not what I wanted. So let's try it again. JSON. That's one, because if the extension is JSON, it will do the formatting itself. So as you can use this version of Swagger, how is the API named? And here is a list of all paths which are supported. So the path is either API events or API events ID. And here is a list of operations. You can say get, you can say post. And if there is an ID, you can say get, you can say put, and you can say delete. Here is also some operation ID which should be unique. So API events get, API events post, API events by ID get, and things like that. So that's great. And here is also the definition of all the objects we are providing, which are accepted by the API. So you can see event DTO is object, there is ID of type string, title string, description string, there is array of dates, and you can see it's event date DTO. So there is two datetime fields, begin date, end date, and things like that. So this is a complete definition of our API, and I have to fix the URL here. So Swagger v1 Swagger JSON, and let's run it again. And if you say /Swagger, it should run the Swagger UI, and it loaded this file. This is the default one, and here is a list of events, so you can see what data you will get, and you can also click try it out, and it will call the actual API, and we have deleted all the records from the database, so now nothing. You can see there is nothing here. You can use post. You can also specify your own object here, so that's also great. And there are the other methods, and there are a couple of ways how to generate a proxy client for this API. So one of them is use web interface editor.swagger.io. You can paste your Swagger JSON. So if I copy this out and paste Swagger JSON here, they ask if I want to convert from JSON to YAML. So they convert it from one format to other one, and there is the same thing, but you can say generate server and generate client. So if you want to generate client, you can say, for example, I want where is C#? This is C#. So if you want to generate C# client and click, they will create a zip package with the entire project. So that's one way of how I can create the project. They are also edit some tests for me. So that's one thing I can use, and there are some configuration options for this, so the project can be named differently. So that's one way. The other way was, I don't know if it's here right now, but in some versions of Visual Studio there was an option to create API client. Maybe they moved this option somewhere else. It was, I believe, it was part of Azure SDK. So there was an option to do this, or there is an alternative, and I quite like it. It's a library called NSwag, and it can generate the clients for me, so I can use NSwag to generate my own clients. So there are several ways how to do this. You can just use ASP.NET Web API assembly. It should also work with ASP.NET Core. I think that this README isn't updated. Or it can start with the JSON file. So you may even skip the step where you generate Swagger JSON from your web API. You will just give this tool this assembly, and it will discover the controllers by itself. But we can use this way from Swagger to C#, and also there is a Swagger to TypeScript. So if you like using some client-side framework, you can happily use Swagger to TypeScript client, and you can choose from one of APIs you really need. So let's use NSwag to generate our clients. And for client, I will create a standalone project, because in the future I may package it as a NuGet package and have a separate NuGet package for every version of my API. So open events dot client, or sorry, backend dot client. So open events dot backend dot client. I'm watching for typos. Yeah, so that should be correct. And there are a few ways how to generate the client. We can create a C# console app which would generate the client for us, and then we can run this in a CI or things like that. But we can also use a quite useful feature called CSX. It's a file extension which will allow me to use some scripting. So that's also an option how to use this. The CSX I have used in one project is basically it's a text file with C# code. You don't need to have namespace and classes here, just your own code, and you can reference a lot of libraries and things like that. However, I think that we can do the console app, because it's easier to consume NuGet packages from a console app. So I will create open events backend client generator, open events.backend client generator. Okay, so that's my console app, and let's install NSwag into this console application. So NSwag, and we need NSwag code generation C#. That's the package we need. So this would allow us to generate a client for C#. I hope that this is the correct package, because there's a lot of packages. So NSwag code generation C#. So install. Okay, so there's a crazy hell of packages we will need, and yes to all, and it seems like my packages were installed. So let's see how this is generated. I never remember the names of the classes, but for every way from something to something, there's a nice page with the things you will need. So let's just copy this out and use here. This console app will be very easy to do. So this is Swagger document from JSON, and I need to get the JSON somewhere. And there is several options how I can obtain one. Right now, I can just run the application and get the Swagger JSON, But of course, if I'm in this continuous integration, it would be easier to use the other NSWAG package that would directly look in the ASP.NET Core assembly, and because it doesn't have to be actually deployed and run somewhere. But also the other option is that I will run this console app manually when I change the API, so it won't be automated, and in that case I will have the application running, so because I have been testing it before. So at the beginning, let's just say JSON, and let's grab the JSON. So okay, so we have web client here, and let's say web client download string async. Sorry, just okay, download string async. So let's hope I have the async version. The async main should be supported in last release of Visual Studio, because there is a new version of C# language which allows me to use this async async main, and I need to enable C# 7.1 support for this project. So let's do it. I don't know if yeah. So let's say await download string async, and here should be an URL, and let's say that URL is the first argument which I will pass to my my file. Of course, I should check if the arguments are correct, but this is my internal tool, so let's not be so strict. So check the command line arguments. So this is my URL, and this should be a target directory, should be the second argument in my app. So I'm downloading this string. Oh, it wants URI, so let's convert this to URI, and oh, sorry, this is not the correct one. I need this task async, because the asynchronous methods were on the web client present before we had async await support, so they had to name it download string task async, because the async work in other way, and maybe they can also support the string, so I don't need the conversion to URI. So that's my method when I'm getting the JSON, and from JSON async, so I also need this. So this is the way how I'll get the Swagger document. So let's extract a method for this. So get Swagger document. This is the first one. It will download the URL, which I have passed as an argument, and return a Swagger document, and this will generate my class. So let's name it API client. It can be just a constant, because it's not so important for us, and the namespace will be open events.backend.client. So this will be my namespace, and this will generate the code, and I need to save the code somewhere, and that's why I have the target directory here, because I can use this to save my file. So I can say file.write all text, which will just here's the string, here's the path, and write it. So this the path will be, I will create a variable for this, and this will be the contents of the file. And path combine, and I will use target there, and API client.cs. So this will be name of my file, and I guess that's it. Just a little refactoring. So this code generation can be also extracted to some method. So get or generate code, and this can be used to say write file. So I have nice three methods here, and they're in incorrect order. So let's move them. There's a handy shortcut, Ctrl-Alt-Shift and arrow up or arrow down, which moves the methods up and down. So I like to use it in RSharper, and that should generate the code. So let's try it. Okay, so let's open properties, and let's specify the command line argument here. So application arguments, the first one is the URL of my Swagger. It still works because I have launched the application with Ctrl F5, which runs it in IIS Express, which is still running. It's Ctrl F5 runs the application without the debugger. So that's it's still running. And so this is the first argument, and the second argument will be double dot and go one level back, or just we can just say API client, and we will see. Okay, so let's just say dot, which means current directory, and let's see if there is bin or bin/debug or something like that. So let's try this. So I will set this as startup project, and I will try to run it. So let's see if it works. Okay, there's some problem. Program doesn't contain static main method suitable for an entry point, which means that it doesn't recognize the static main method. Maybe there's the problem that it's async, and maybe I don't have the correct version of runtime running here, because RSharper says that I'm using C# 7.1, but maybe there is some project reference missing here. So let's look at the NuGet packages. If I can update something, maybe it will run this. If not, I will just remove the async main method, because I haven't used it before. I just know that it's present in the framework since C# 7.1. Maybe there's something. No, there is .NET Core 2.0, so I cannot see anything advanced. But no. C# last major version. Okay, maybe that's it, because last major version means 7.0. So if I say C# 7.1, it may start working. It's if it's this, it's okay. So yeah, now it compiled. So it's hidden here in build advanced, and you need to specify the version of C# language, because by default it's C# latest major version, which is default. So by default, if you want to use async main, you need to switch on this. Okay, so it's good to know. The great thing at streaming when you are coding is that you learn new things. Okay, so let's run this, and let's see where the file is actually located. I hope it won't be in program files. That would be unfortunate. Okay, so I don't know what happens. There is it. Okay, let's restart it. Oh no, this icon, not browser link one. Okay, so let's end here and we will see what happens. Okay, so we are here, and this is okay. So maybe I'm also missing something when I'm using the await stuff. So let's maybe there was some exception. Maybe I can use try catch to make sure what happens. I don't know what really happens here. So let's see where is the problem. Okay, so let's break on exception, and we will see. And if it doesn't work, I will get rid of the async awaits, and because I don't have enough time to play with this. Okay, so there is my exception. Required property version wasn't found in JSON. Okay, so I'm suspecting this. When I configured this one, I haven't specified version equals v1, and maybe it's required, because I have seen on the GitHub where I've browsed the configuration of useSwagger UI, I have seen that they specify the version v1, so that may be the reason. Okay, I have a breakpoint. Do you want to stop debugging? No. Okay, maybe I have to rebuild the project, so the web app can be run again with this configuration. So let's refresh this guy. So there is info, and here is version v1, and it said that version is missing from info, so I believe that's the case. And now I can run the console app, and we will see if it works. Okay, so yeah, it finished, and that's it. So okay, so a couple of points. The try catch is really important here, because if it's async and there is some exception, Visual Studio, because it's await call, so Visual Studio will not show you the details of the exception. So use the try catch in the async static main. And now we didn't have any exception, which is great. So let's look where the file is located. So my project is in cdev open events, src open events, generator bin debug, netcore app 2.0, but the file is apparently not located here, but it's located here. Here is the API client. So my path, which I want to run, to pass as the argument, should be double dot, go one level back, so this one, and open event backend client, and this should be the correct project where I want to locate my file. So let's delete API client from here, and let's run the project once again. Okay, and now the file should be located in the correct project. So that's it. Here is my project. So let's see if we have all the dependencies here. Okay, so we are missing the dependency for newtons of JSON, so I should install newtons of JSON in the package. It appears that only newtons of JSON is missing here. Even when I scroll down, newtons of, yeah, everything is newtons of JSON. So let's install newtons of JSON. So package manager, backend client, and install package newtons of JSON. Okay. And now I have this package. So now all the errors disappeared, which is great, because when I built this guy, it should work. So build succeeded, so that's great. And I'm coding for more than 2 hours, which means that it's enough for today, because I want to do something else also. So it was a great time. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know all of your feedback in comments, in chat, or write me email or on Twitter or anything like that. Of course, I will commit all the things I have done. Of course, I know that I should commit much more frequently. However, this is just a prototype API, so I don't mind if it's in the first commit. So maybe first prototype of events API communication with MongoDB, also Swagger client generator project, and that's it. So yeah, it should be several separate commits, but I always keep forgetting on it. But since it's the first commit, it's not such a big deal. Of course, in later time it would be much bigger issue. So now it's pushing on GitHub, and for today I think that it's all. So thanks for watching, and of course, if you have any questions or suggestions or any feedback, let me know. I will announce the date for the next live stream tomorrow or a day after tomorrow. So we will continue with the admin portal in .vvm. So it will use the API we have just created, and it will allow to insert, edit, and delete and list all the events in the system. So that will be the second part of this live coding sessions. Okay, so thanks, and see you next time.